Good evening, dear friends. This is Thursday, October the 29th in the year 2015, and we're in the Pinegate Meditation Hall. The topic of tonight's Dharma talk is healing the wounded inner child, and we're going to have quite a number of sessions that focus in on healing the inner child over the next few weeks. So if you have a look at the flip chart, we'll see that tonight it is a Dharma talk, and we have a session on the Buddha's teaching on mindful breathing, and I would like to say quite a few things about this. Last week we actually started the process when we had a deep relaxation, and the deep relaxation is a practice that's derived from the Buddha's teachings on the full awareness of breathing. The Buddha used 4 avenues to investigate suffering, so we could then transform suffering into happiness. And those 4 avenues were the body, emotions and feelings, the mind, then perceptions and consciousness. These were the 4 avenues of investigation. And as we'll see, they all interconnected. So in the deep relaxation, which Carolyn presented last week, what was taking place was she was focusing on the body. There was a whole body scan. There was, on the in-breath, you would identify a particular part of your body, your feet, your liver, your eyes, your heart. And on the out-breath, you would send love and gratitude to that part of the body, so that you become totally immersed in your body with this wonderful body scan. And then Carolyn sings lullabies to you, which makes up a particular kind of Dharma talk in its own right. But by being relocated in your body through the deep relaxation process, you automatically connect to your emotions and feelings, to your mind, your perceptions and consciousness. It all interconnects. But the Buddha based this particular teaching on the body, so that we would be rooted and grounded. I'd like to say a little bit more about that. I spoke about this particular sutra to the Sangha, and it's a video on the Pinegate channel on YouTube. It's called On Being Splendid. So you can find out what is there. That's not the one. Here we go. So this particular teaching from the Buddha on mindful breathing, it was a mature teaching by the Buddha. 1 year at the end of the rainy season retreat at the East Park of Savatthi, the Buddha looked out from his hut and he saw all the senior monks teaching 20, 30, 40 young monks, and he decided the Sangha is mature enough to grasp this teaching. And he'd been prompted to do this by his faithful attendant Ananda. And Ananda had said, is there a teaching that brings together all the other teachings? And the Buddha said, yes, there is. The Anapanasati Sutra on the full awareness of mindful breathing. And the Buddha agreed to stay in this park for another month so that everyone could prepare to receive it. And monks from all over North India came to listen to the Buddha deliver what I think is a masterpiece in the Buddhist lexicon. And there are 4 avenues of investigation, which I mentioned to you a moment ago. And we can take the Buddha's teachings on mindful breathing and be intelligent with it. In other words, we tap into the Buddha mind, which is universal, and we see what works for the applications we're looking for. We're looking at applications to heal the wounded inner child. Now we can apply the 4 functions of mindfulness. With our in-breath and out-breath, we recognize the wounded inner child within us. The second stage is to use our breath in and out to embrace that inner child. In the meditation that opened this evening, we were embracing that inner child and seeing the difficulties inherited from ancestors and taking care. This requires the attribute of concentration. As we do particular meditations and certain practices, our concentration emerges more strongly so that we're able to embrace the inner child with the skillful use of our in-breath and our out-breath. Then we take a step with our breath. Our breath is this wonderful, intelligent mechanism that if we only would wake up and know how to use it, things would change. We soothe and relieve the suffering of the inner child. In other words, we pay attention to our difficult emotions, the ones we don't like to come up. As we become stronger in mindfulness, we can examine our difficult emotions instead of ignoring them. And the last step to take in terms of mindfulness is that when you have concentration and when you have mindfulness together, insight always emerges. We gain insight into the roots of the mental formations that cause the suffering of the inner child. We know why they suffer. Then we can take remedial steps. So mindfulness, concentration and insight, when we put those 3 together, we have the engine or the energy of transformation. But it doesn't come about by just thinking about it or saying. It takes training and it takes skillfulness. And skillfulness is really very, very important. There's a Sanskrit word for it, upaya. And when we become more and more skillful, then we can produce results. But if we don't train on a daily basis, if we don't become skillful, then we're stuck with a wounded inner child that frames our existence and basically messes up our lives until we do something about it. So the inner child can heal once we take care of ourselves. And going through the 4 avenues, body, feelings, emotions, mind, then objects of mind, the perceptions and consciousness, we can make some traction. So let's go back. I said I would only have a few words on the Buddha's sutra on mindful breathing, but I've taken more than a few words. Then we're going to have a session on earth touchings. We've already done the deep relaxation. And the earth touchings is where we get in touch with our spiritual, genetic, and land ancestors. And we identify those ancestral beings who caused harm to us. And in this particular ceremony, we choose to let those go from our consciousness. It's a really very big step. We are calm enough to identify which of our ancestors in which families, spiritual, genetic, and land, which virtues are we going to retain and which ones are we going to allow to pass from our consciousness into the earth. So this is selective watering of the seeds in our consciousness. Because the seeds in our consciousness are placed there by our different ancestors. And some of our ancestors were fantastic, others less so. So we're very candidly identifying the seeds of suffering laid down in our childhood by different ancestors. So that's quite a powerful ceremony. And the last session will be a shamanic healing journey, where again, once again, we will focus on the wounded inner child. So that's the program over the next few weeks. Now let us come onto the inner child and his suffering, her suffering. And before we can come to grips with this, we have to be very clear about the territory of suffering. And I turn to my teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, with a quote, so I can open this Dharma talk. This is from his book, Reconciliation, which was written in 2010. And I quote, "Dealing with suffering is like handling a poisonous snake. We have to learn about the snake, and we ourselves have to grow stronger and more stable in order to handle it without hurting ourselves. At the end of this process, we will be ready to confront the snake. If we never confront it, one day it will surprise us and we will die of a snake bite. The pain we carry in the deep levels of our consciousness is similar. When it grows big and confronts us, there's nothing we can do if we haven't practiced becoming strong and stable in mindfulness. We should only invite our suffering up when we're ready. Then, when it comes up, we are equipped to handle it and transform it. To transform our suffering, we don't struggle with it or try to get rid of it. We simply bathe it in the light of our mindfulness. But we have to generate the energy of mindfulness. We have to generate concentration and insight. That's the work. So the first thing that we have to do is to identify the warning signals. You see this up here. There's all kinds of warning signals of the suffering, wounded inner child. And what is so imperative is that we develop and we nurture our mindfulness through daily, diligent practice. That will enable us to wake up to the reality of our suffering that most people would rather avoid. And if we pay attention, we would notice that there are very clear warning signals. The first one is that we get caught in our dramas. We're all drama queens. We so love our drama. And we exaggerate things out of all proportion. And we blow a tiny little ember in the mind up into a blazing forest fire just because we like the drama and we like telling everyone else about our drama. To anyone who will listen. And there's also a peculiar twist to our suffering. We almost romance it. We court our suffering. And this is a deadly step to take. And we keep the suffering alive when we're having a romance, a courtship with our suffering. And also, I often, when I'm in a coffee shop and I'm listening to conversations around me, people around me, they're having competitions about who is suffering the most. My suffering is bigger than your suffering. And again, this is like a romance and a courtship with your suffering that has devastating impacts. Because when we have a courtship with our suffering, when we keep it alive, we're creating a codependent relationship, and we have to call that by its true name. It's addiction. We're addicted to the drama. We're addicted to keeping the suffering alive. And we become emotionally and physiologically tied into our suffering so tight that we can't be without it, even though it's destroying us. Occasionally we can grasp brief insights that, oh yeah, this is suffering. But we only deal with the outside and surface appearances. Remember, the surface exposure has a long history, and the small snake grows into a monster. The addiction to our suffering now becomes embedded as a mental state in our minds. And we respond to any glimpse of suffering with such destructive emotion that we reinforce the causes and conditions that produced the suffering in the first place. So we continue shooting ourselves in the foot, torpedoing our lives over and over again. Does this sound familiar to your experience? And let's be clear. Our suffering is caused by abuse. Emotional, physical, and sexual. It then becomes an organizing template in the mind. We have to realize that if we don't take care of our suffering, it becomes a template in our mind that then orders how our life unfolds. So we create an abusive relationship with that template and its qualities, which are addiction, fear, codependency. To stop the cycle of harm, we need a OMG moment, an oh my God moment, where we can say to ourselves, oh my God, this is what I've been doing all my life. How do I stop it? Until we get that kind of insight, that moment where we realize, I've been suffering all my life. I've been reinforcing it. How do I stop it? That's when you can get to work. If you don't have that moment, you're going to continue to suffer. There's no two ways about it. The way out is to develop mindfulness, concentration, and insight through diligent practice. So we need an antidote to the abusive relationship which is established with our suffering. And I think it's an awesome realization to just penetrate the darkness and realize, okay, this is what I've been doing most of my life. It's time for me to take steps. And then you start to investigate, and you go backwards from the surface. You investigate the causes and conditions that placed you in such suffering. And as we learn the different practices in Buddhism, the different tools, and there are so many tools, there are so many concentrations that we can use, all they do is support our retraining. We break through the recycling of suffering by retraining our minds. So we're equipping ourselves for a major journey. But there's a bigger picture that I want to introduce you to so that you understand the bigger picture in which this drama is unfolding. Here we go. The bigger picture is to get a handle or a grasp on how our consciousness works. There are two main aspects of our consciousness. The outer ring is just a schematic to identify that's our consciousness. There's two main parts, the mind and the store. Our mind consciousness is our everyday logic by which we make sense of the world. Our store consciousness is exactly what the word implies. It stores all the positive and negative seeds from ourselves and our ancestors. and it's buried down here. You have negative seeds of hate, anger, jealousy, greed. You have wholesome seeds such as love, compassion, joy, equanimity, mindfulness. And these seeds are competing for power. Now the mind consciousness also connects directly to the other sense consciousness: eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body. But there's something else tricky. There is another level of consciousness called manas. And manas is made up by all the negative energies in store consciousness glomming together to create another level of consciousness, which is like the call center of judgmental and badass things. All that manas does is divide, separate, harm. It's made up of total illusion and distortion. But what we have to grasp is that manas runs the mind. So what can we say about our senses? The mind runs these. The mind is run by distortion. So what we are interpreting in the world is based on distortion, on separation, on anger and hate. Just examine the Republican slate for the presidency. That's divisive. It's anger. It's racist. It's hate. And manas is in free fall with these guys. I just shake my head when I listen to the debates, and I just can hardly believe it. But here's the key. The mind can do something else other than be run by distortion and getting false views of reality. The mind can switch on mindfulness practice and choose to foster these seeds in consciousness. Okay? This is a deliberate choice. I'm going to practice my mindfulness. So every time you do sitting meditation, walking meditation, or mindfulness practice, the mind is going right through manas into store consciousness and making these wholesome seeds stronger. And each level of consciousness is malleable. So as these get stronger, these get weaker. Do you follow me? So with constant mindfulness, concentration and insight being applied, you start to unravel the unwholesome seeds. You're creating new programs in store consciousness. And you're not healing yourself by sitting on a couch listening to a shrink, because that's just mind to mind. You have to go right to the store and change these patterns in store consciousness two ways. The first is to build up all the wholesome seeds in consciousness, like the meditation that opened tonight's session, which was on healing the inner child and seeing that some of the harm in the inner child was the harm in their parents, which has been passed on. So doing that meditation is reinforcing the wholesome seeds, and as it reinforces them, it dilutes the unwholesome seeds that can harm us. And sooner or later, there's not enough energy going into manas, so manas starts to dissolve, and we begin to start stepping into awakening of one kind or another. So this is the biggest picture. This is the gardening we have to do in our mind. And I'm going over it rather quickly, but I want you to realize that the mind naturally is run by manas, which is distortion and illusion, but the mind can also do something about that. It can choose to switch on the light of mindfulness practice, elevate the wholesome seeds, eliminate the unwholesome seeds. So the transformation is down here. It's not in the mind itself. Okay? So let's go back. So we get an idea of the bigger picture, and that's to have some understanding or some grasp of what consciousness looks like. Let's go on to the next page. When our inner child has been damaged and suffers severely, we have to realize that it frames our whole lives. It affects everything that we do, say, anticipate, or participate in. And we have to look at causes that abuse, emotional, physical, and sexual, during childhood creates a lost, frightened, and deeply wounded child. And in different ways we have all suffered from that in one way or another. So we have to try and reach that suffering child within us from an adult perspective. And I'm going to show you how that works. Because we tend, or we prefer, not to bring up the suffering of our childhood or our teenage years. So we bury them and we hide. We run away from seeing deeply into the causes of suffering that we endured as a child or a teenager. Whenever memories arise, we think we cannot handle them. And we mask it with drugs, alcohol, going wild. And we deflect them back into the deepest realms of our unconscious mind. The snake's getting bigger when we do that. So our wounded child is often never seen, simply because we're terrified of further suffering. We don't want to deal with it. But we've got to find a way to reach that inner child. Make her safe. Make him safe. So we've got to get past the fear. We have to really be courageous and address the suffering. And it's through suffering and transforming it, that's what leads to awakening and enlightenment. There's a wonderful short statement in Buddhism that I like. No mud, no lotus. If you haven't trudged through the mud, you're not going to get the lotus. So suffering can be a huge boost in that. So we're all sitting here as adults, but also there's a little boy in us, a little girl in us, who's afraid and suffers deeply. No matter what kind of pretend happy face we present to our colleagues, family, and to everyone else. And that suffering child within our adult frame, unless we do something about it, it will color everything we do. It will generate fears, insecurities, self-loathing, wounding us in all our relationships in life. Now that wounded child is you. It's me. And we have to extend a different kind of energy to that child, so that suffering of that child can be understood, it can be diffused, and it can be transformed. Mindfulness is the way. The mind choosing to switch on the light of mindfulness in order to reach the inner child with steadiness, with calm, with love. And there are distinct passages that we can use, and we'll go through one or two of them. So we have to become really mindful and aware of what's going on with our inner child. What caused the suffering in me when I was a child, a teenager? And as an adult, we must no longer run away. We must no longer hide. We must stand up and realize, okay, I'm an adult woman, I'm an adult man, I can deal with this. I can show that inner child all the things that I feel I did not receive. Because we are cultivating seeds of mindful healing in ourselves, the energy of those seeds continues into everything that we interconnect with. So we're healing and transforming generations of ingrained patterns from our ancestors, which have produced corrosive rust in our hearts and our minds. And Thich Nhat Hanh, in a question and answer session in Plum Village, this was a long time ago, in October 1998, but I remember it very well. And he'd been asked a question about the issues of child abuse and the wounded inner child. And very gently, he spoke about the ignorance and pain of the abuser, as well as that of the abused. And he stated that understanding and compassion was the basis of recovery. And this might be hard to swallow. It means moving away from blaming or feeling guilt and shame, but instead seeing deeply and understanding. First of all, we have to understand that the person who may have abused us lived under ignorant and deprived conditions, without support, guidance, or wise teachers around to help them. So much so that the power of ignorance was stronger than the person, and so they were driven to do wrong and horrible things. If the person who's been abused can begin to understand just a little bit of that, a tiny drop of nectar of compassion is all that's needed. And it's awfully hard to find at first, but if you cannot find the compassion, you're going to be stuck with the hatred. So when we can understand the experience and recovery from abuse, we can practice and use our talents to promote measures to protect children. That's a kind of an antidote to our own abuse, that we make sure other children will be protected, because we've experienced the lack of a protection. Now, there are many techniques and methodologies of therapy that address issues of the inner wounded child. The first one I'm going to describe is quite simple, and anyone can do it. It's a first step, and I recommend that it be practiced under the guidance of a therapist, a shaman, or a spiritual teacher. Now, when you take refuge in someone who's going to help you, this is something I've said to the Sangha before, make sure you don't take refuge in someone who's just as crazy as you are. Take refuge in someone who is solid, knowledgeable, somebody you can trust and someone who has a track record in transformation. So this exercise is a diary or a logbook for you and the inner child to write to one another. The adult you will write with your right hand and say, "Hello, little John," or "Hello, Mary. How are you, my dear?" You can say, "I'm sorry for being away for so long." It's like you're talking to a real person inside you who's been neglected and has suffered terribly. So you make the effort. You encourage them all the time to know that they're going to be safe, they're going to be loved and cherished. And you write in your own words along these lines of cherishing, loving, taking care. Then with your other hand, the hand that you don't write with, you allow the inner child to express herself, to express himself. And you don't edit. Just write down whatever comes out. And you may be surprised because it might be angry, blaming, and abusive words that come out. My left hand is doing this. But you're allowing that inner child to express through your non-writing hand. And it's not your job to be shocked or defensive. You are an adult, a mature adult. You know what you're doing, otherwise you wouldn't be doing this exercise. You're trying to make it okay and safe for that child. So if with your non-writing hand they write to you in abusive words, you don't take anything personally. You're just there to reassure, to cherish and uplift. That's your job. And to do that takes steady mindfulness. So you bring to this communication, it's like a sacred communication between you and the wounded inner child inside. You're bringing all the qualities of love, compassion and wisdom that you can do. And you really have to make a big effort to do that. And the energies of the seeds that you are communicating to the inner child works on the energy of the traumatized child inside, and it reduces their trauma and their suffering. So you're talking to him, to her, through writing in this way, with total love and acute mindfulness. Those two go together. Then read your diary entries out loud, placing yourself in your own shoes, then placing yourself in the inner child's shoes. Eventually you find there's only one pair of shoes, but it doesn't start that way. So the simple act of reading out loud is a way for both of you to be heard. The adult you, the adult me, and the harmed inner child. So on a daily basis, you register with how deeply your understanding and love is getting through to the wounded child. For she's listening, he is listening to every word and knows that you are listening to them. And you start to draw closer, the adult and the inner child, as you bring awareness, love and healing to the suffering and pain of that child. So as an adult, mature adult, you bring the best of your mindfulness. And I can tell you it works, because I went through this. And I did find eventually that the two pairs of shoes really were artificial. There was only one pair of shoes. And that's when you start to get the integration. And you take the inner child on picnics. Other people might think you're a loony because you're nattering away and nobody's there, but you know who's there. And for walks, and you include them in everything that you do. And when you are aware that way, you start to do things in a far more mindful manner. And you can keep saying to the inner child, thank you for being with me. This makes me feel so happy. Because you discover that your relationships with co-workers, with friends, with family are subtly changing for the better. Because the suffering of the inner child is no longer framing your life the way it used to. So you and I are not so abrasive because of the work we've done with our inner child. And it takes a lot of discipline to just send love, caring, compassion to the inner child that has been hurt. But support's necessary for this. You need that wise spiritual friend, teacher, shaman, to keep you steady and mindful. You know, if the inner child is swearing at you, you don't swear back. If I can put it in those terms, you can just say, I would like to talk to you in a different way. You're always setting this example with love. And I'm happy to say that this exercise worked for me, as I experienced the painfully slow establishment of trust, then the exhilarating joy of safety and integration. Until, as I mentioned before, there was only one pair of shoes. There had been an integration with a freshness and vitality that I continually treasure to this day. Now, to support this journey of actively attempting to reach the inner child that has been harmed, there are other practices and meditations that are valuable. We're always bringing mindfulness, concentration, and insight to our inner child. Remember, mindfulness, concentration, and insight, these are the energies of transformation, not just of you, but of your inner child. So when you do that, you're enveloping that hurt, wounded child inside into the refreshing energy of transformation. So you've worked diligently to nurture seeds of happiness, joy and safety in the consciousness not only of yourself, but of the inner child. And that consciousness of the inner child changes as you change. You make the choice, and then you make the effort. So when despair and fear arise from the inner child in our conversations, we've got the presence of mind to listen deeply and surround that fear with a stronger energy field of mindfulness. So this is a deep and beautiful process because we're not running away. We're not hiding from afflictions. We're dealing with it head on, but how? With love, with compassion, with mindfulness, with awareness. And there are so many teachings within the Buddhist lexicon, such as the 5 remembrances, the 5-year-old child meditation, the Sutra on Mindful Breathing, which I spoke about, deep relaxation, touching the earth, removing the object, and many, many others. And it's a very, very nice gatha in Plum Village. I suppose it's the seal of Plum Village. It goes, I have arrived, I am home. But the Vietnamese origin of this gatha is a little bit different. It doesn't translate as I have arrived, I am home. In Vietnamese it translates as your child has arrived, your child is home. And this is a beautiful way to reach your inner child when you're walking in a park or by a river. You can be more specific and you just recite to yourself, in breath, my inner child has arrived. Out breath, my inner child is home. Let's do that together with the bell. Just say it to ourselves. I'll say it out loud. In breath, my inner child has arrived. Out breath, my inner child is home. This is good practice. It's intelligent practice. Because with intelligence, you're using your breath and your concentration to welcome your wounded inner child home to you as an adult person. So to heal this wounded inner child, we have to cultivate the internal energy of mindfulness within ourselves. And only then can we stop and look deeply into what caused the fears and traumas of abuse. So you don't go straight away to, okay, what was it? You're developing a relationship, a very careful, steady relationship. And you just wait. The inner child will tell you. So you just have to be patient. And you are coming from a space of clarity, of maturity, of being adult and smart enough to deal with the inner child in one of these ways. And there's another way I would suggest to you. And here I'm adapting the teaching of the Buddha on love. But why don't we change it so it becomes a love meditation for the inner child? Remember the four Brahma Viharas. This was a teaching that the Buddha gave to a Hindu gentleman, a Brahmin, who wanted to know how could he be with Brahma, the Hindu god. And the Buddha said to him, well, you can be with Brahma if you cultivate love, compassion, joy and equanimity every day. That's how you can be with Brahma. And it's interesting that this very powerful teaching by the Buddha wasn't given to Buddhists, it was given to a Hindu gentleman who was a Brahmin. So we have these four aspects: love, compassion, joy, and equanimity. So what you do first of all, you can actually use we have a meditation CD which has the four Brahma Viharas as track 2. You can just listen to it and go along with it. You bring love, compassion, joy, and equanimity into yourself, first of all. And then you bring those four components of love from the Buddha's teachings into the inner child. You say, in breath, I bring love. Out breath, to my inner child. You can say a loving name for your inner child, Dear Mary or Darling Joseph. Feel the energy of love fill you from top to toe. And then just register with the energy for several breaths. Then continue. In breath, I bring compassion. Out breath, to my inner child. Then in breath, I bring joy. Out breath, to my inner child. In breath, I bring equanimity. Out breath, to my inner child. Then you conclude the meditation by once more bringing love, compassion, joy, and equanimity to the adult you. So you're bringing the Buddha's teachings on love to yourself, to the child, back to yourself. And it's a graceful dance. And the Buddha's teachings on love provide the foundation for this particular meditation. The concentration on these four qualities is an incredibly powerful instrument for healing. I don't have words to adequately express this, but I'll quote from Thich Nhat Hanh because he does. This is what he says. The Buddha says, if we gather together all the virtuous actions we have realized in this world, they are not equal to practicing love meditations. If we collect together all the light from the stars, it will not be as bright as the light of the moon. In the same way, practicing love meditation is greater than all other virtuous actions combined. Now, there are many other meditations and practices we can use to connect to the inner child. I've just indicated a few of them. These are practices that I tried with some success. But one factor that I'd like to mention in my journey to reach the wounded inner child was that I was very determined to heal. Once I had that, oh my God moment, I'd better do something, I was very, very determined. And I think you have to be determined because you want to get to this inner child. You don't want the damage done to the child in you to frame your life, to torpedo your relationships, to generally mess up your life. So deal with it. But you deal with it with intelligence. From your own deep daily practice. And I'd like to leave the talk with the views of Thich Nhat Hanh. There's something about the love meditation from the Buddha, the four Brahma Viharas, that is very deep and lovely. And it's also very, very powerful. And that particular meditation, I do that daily. Because going back to the model of consciousness, if you are on a daily basis cultivating love, compassion, joy and equanimity, those seeds are going to grow larger and larger, more stronger in your store consciousness. They will dilute the energy of the unwholesome seeds. And manas, the distorting, divisive level of consciousness, will no longer be sorted, will no longer be supported. You'll be sorting it out in your own way. So the four Brahma Viharas is a meditation that I would strongly recommend. You pick up and use this on a daily basis. I'm so used to it now that when I forget, my body feels antsy because I've forgotten to do it. So these issues with the inner child, which I have outlined, in the coming weeks we will deal with it through practice. The touching of the earth. We allow Mother Earth to help us recognize the harm done to us by our ancestors when we were children and teenagers. And we choose to let those seeds that have lodged in our consciousness from our ancestors, we're going to let them go. And we do that with our genetic ancestors, our spiritual ancestors, and our land ancestors. That's a very, very powerful exercise. And we'll also be doing a shamanic healing journey to heal the inner child, which will focus on how we can transform the damage and be reunited with that inner child. and become one with it. Thank you for listening to me.